My name is Francisca Porches Coronado, and I'm the founder and one of the coordinators of the Latinx Therapist Action Network. Thank you for being here. I'm super happy to introduce to you all one of our members. But before that, I'd like to share just a little bit about what the network is. The network is an effort to organize Latino, Latina, Latinx therapists across the United States to around a healing justice platform, a platform that really centers an analysis of politicized healing, and specifically to be able to play a role within the broader movement for immigrant rights and to be able to intervene in trauma produced by the state violence in the form of the immigration injustice system. And so that takes many forms. I invite you all to visit our website, and we'll share the link here on the chat. It's Latinx Therapist Action Network. And if you just type that, you'll find us. And there's different ways to support, whether you're a practitioner yourself and want to join, whether you want to spread the word to the world what we do, whether you want to donate or you want to volunteer in any way, or you want to connect with us as an organization and work with us. There's many ways. So I totally encourage you to visit our website and to learn a bit more about us. And so introduce Dieniz Costa, and they are a queer and Afro-Latinx person from the Bronx in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and is currently living in the Southwest, the West. Somebody would call it the Southwest, other people would call it the West of the United States. And they've done a whole lot of important work inside of movement spaces, supported movement leaders. And so they've devoted their life to learning all that they could and become their life's work, which is the healing work, the mental health work, the leadership work. And they have a master's in social work. And I'm going to hand it over to them so that they can say a little bit more about themselves. We're happy to have you all here today and to have Dieniz share their wisdom around trans and LGBTQIA wellness. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Fran, for the lovely introduction. I've been with the network pretty much since the first round or second round of recruitment. So it's been quite a number of years, and I could not be prouder to be part of a network that really stands for our values. And I can see in the way that, we get trainings and offer these continuing education opportunities for each other. So today, I want to give some context to the presentation. I am a provider in many ways to the trans community. Over a third of my clients, at points more than half, are trans identified people of color. So I bring a very specific lens in terms of most of what I'm presenting on today is scientifically backed, but a lot of it is based on my experience providing services and helping people heal on this journey under the trans umbrella of identity, or people who identify as non-binary. That being said, my information here is not all-encompassing, and I always say that the community knows best. So I'm not pretending to be an expert on trans wellness as someone who's not identified as trans. I just want to really present my experience working with the community and what I've found to be helpful and some of the barriers. So a little bit about me. I'm a longtime activist, community organizer, used to work heavily in reproductive justice organizing. And at a certain point, I decided I loved the macro, but the micro was where I felt the pain of the people. And I really wanted to do something about that. At the same time, I started realizing my physical body couldn't actually keep up with the work flow of organizing. I couldn't work late nights. I was just having a lot of fatigue and stuff. So I do identify as someone who's turned into a life coach and a holistic provider for wellness services. I am Afro-Latinx, Taino indigenous ancestry from Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. And I identify as someone who's queer. I am neurodivergent, and I also am quite unapologetic about that. Some other things, I live with fibromyalgia. It's a neurological condition. It impacts how much I can do and how fast I can do it in life. And it's really been a gift in that it's taught me to live a life of care. And also it's taught me to teach other people things I've learned, and also be open to not one size fits all. Because a lot of things that worked for other people didn't work for me in my journey. And last but not least, I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you, whether that is connecting you to resources, talking to you one-on-one, being someone that you follow on Instagram just to get some tips and tricks every so often. But my mission here on this planet is to support people. So however I can do that, please let me know. Next slide, please. So to begin, what does wellness mean to you? And feel free to use the chat box to kind of answer this question. Most people, when I ask the question, they feel like they've been put on the spot. Because it's not an easy question to answer. So we'll give you a minute to kind of enter your thoughts, and we shall go from there. Do we have any answers in the chat? So some self/peer supported. Yep, that's one answer. Autonomy, dignity, resourced. Beautiful. I'm loving these answers. Wellness to me is connecting to myself, even if it's messy. Ooh, I love that one. Thank you. And often, we don't think of wellness in all the ways that it can be impacting us, right? Sometimes we just see it from the place where we have a pain point, right? So if right now my physical body is struggling, that might be what I'm focusing on, the wellness of my body. We have another answer, being in peace with my own skin. Beautiful. So we can go on to the next slide, Diana. Thank you. So I want to present the 9 pillars of wellness. And for me, these are the 9 areas of life that we can look at to see where's our valve on well-being, how empty or full is our tank on each of these. So I'll go through all of them a little bit briefly, but really take time after this and really sit with each one of these and ask yourself, what can I be doing to improve this area of my wellness? So for physical wellness, often we think about our body. We think about, is my cholesterol in check? Is my sugar levels in check? Did I pass my wellness exam for work? Right? Have I gotten all my vaccines? That's one way of looking at our physical wellness. Another way of looking at our physical wellness can be looking at our mobility, right? Um, Not all of us have the same level of ability, and it's important to look at how is that impacting your wellness, not just physically, but also the other areas that it might impact. So emotional wellness or vocational wellness, your social wellness might be impacted by that as well. So we want to also take a look at how are these interacting? How does my physical wellness interact with my emotional wellness? And so on. So that's one side of the physical. The last aspect of it that sometimes we don't think about with our physical wellness is looking at our nutrition and how we're consuming food, when we're consuming, what we're consuming, can also have deep impact, not just on our well-being physically, but also on our emotional and mental wellness. More and more, we're finding research studies that are showing us that one of the most important ways that we can create more balance in our brain chemistry is through food. So why isn't that at the forefront of what we discuss when we think about physical wellness? When we talk about emotions, it's how am I able to manage and process my own feelings? My feelings about life, my feelings about work, my feelings about relationships that I'm in. How am I processing all of my feelings? How am I handling those? For some people, that comes through journaling. For other people, that means hiring someone from the Latinx Therapist Action Network and working with them one-on-one. For others, it might be going and being in ceremonies where you can commune and share with other people and hear others' stories and really have space and time to let everything out. But we want to make sure that no matter what strategy we're using, that is actually meeting our need to fully express our emotional wellness. When it comes to mental well-being, a lot of us think of therapy, right? Mental health, mental well-being being associated to therapy. It's not just therapy. It's how do you feel about your own mental health? How do you perceive yourself in terms of your mental capacity and capabilities? And, that can also dip back into physical wellness, right? When we're on medications or on supplements that may or may not be helping our mental wellness. So there we see another overlap between the mental and the physical. Vocational wellness, a lot of people kind of overlook this one when it's one of the places that we spend so much of our time is at work. And I invite everyone to define what success means for you based on what brings you joy, not just what brings you a paycheck, right? And for a lot of people, they feel like they can't quite get there, right? They're doing something that they really don't enjoy, but they're doing it because they feel like they need to. At points they have to, just to make ends meet. Well, the amount of satisfaction that you could be getting from the vocational side might not be there. How do we improve that? How do we address it? slowly long term, right? Because changing careers doesn't just happen overnight. But really giving it the attention that it needs, because it is one of the areas that we spend the most of our time and can actually create a lot of satisfaction for us. And social actually kind of overlaps with vocational a bit, because when we go to work, we tend to socialize. It's one of the things that most humans engage in is socializing while they're at work. So if you don't like the people you're working with and you're working all the time, you can see how this dynamic can become really challenging to go back and forth between environments that just aren't nourishing you. And then you're depleted. So we get to look at, how is my social network supporting me? Right? Are there people in my network who aren't supportive, who are in Brene Brown's words, candle blower outers, right? People who blow out your candles. And it's like, dude, I'm over here trying to protect my candle, keeping my light lit, and you're over there just blowing at it. Not cool, right? So we don't want to be in those environments, because we know how hard it is to keep our candle light lit at times. So assessing those circles, assessing what are the benefits of having these support systems and the workplace is super important for our wellness. Environmental includes everything from your immediate house to your immediate neighborhood, to the dog park you take your dog to the festivals that you might be going to, and really is at the core of a lot of sense of safety that we feel in the world. Our environment impacts that sense of safety so much. And often when we think of our wellness, we're not thinking of the environment. We're not thinking of the benefits of going and participating in a beach cleanup, not just for the beach, but also for your sense of wellness within that community that's cleaning up the beach. And all the benefits that you can get from that. Intellectual wellness is really about your mind. And are you engaging your mind as often as you would like to, in the ways that you would like to? Maybe it means you join a book club. I now lead a book club. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? But it's fun. I get to read a new book every 6 weeks. I get to challenge myself and hold myself accountable by leading a discussion about the book, because otherwise I wouldn't read it. Right? So sometimes it's kind of like knowing yourself and catching yourself and saying, okay, this is what I need to keep my mind engaged. And how do I make those commitments to keep that going? A lot of the time we fall into the trap of like, I did so much reading in college that I never want to read again, right? Or like, I'm done, I'm too busy. But what are 1 or 2 things that you can do every month that would actually help you feel like you're keeping your mind sharp, you're engaging? Maybe that's puzzles, maybe that's going on a scavenger hunt in the park with random strangers. Think outside the box. Sexual wellness is often one that is not included in models of wellness. And it's one that I personally think is the most important at many junctions of life. I have found that, a lot of people will go through struggles around their sexuality at several points in life. And for us to continue to learn and explore our own sexual wellness is super important in being able to achieve, optimal sense of wellness. I'm not talking about a baseline, like I feel good, I'm talking about you're feeling joyful and completely well in all of these areas. And for me, sexual wellness is definitely a big part of that. It adds to so many frustrations and can help in so many ways with all the other forms of wellness. And spiritual doesn't have to be spiritual. It could be religious. It could be I'm connecting with nature, and that's what spiritual means to you. It doesn't have to be that you're sitting in meditation for 15 hours a day. It doesn't have to mean you even meditate. It is yours to define what you believe is spiritual wellness to you. And I think that it's super powerful to sit with yourself and really come to an understanding for yourself of what does my spirituality mean to me. And for a lot of the clients I work with, they haven't even gotten there because they're so in fight or flight. They're so in survival mode that they can't even think about what would help their spiritual wellness. So I love exploring that and jumping into that with clients when they come in, because it really can change the way that we operate in the world. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our community and where we're coming from here. And it's really to understand that every identity that we hold impacts the way that we experience the world and the way that we can access tools and resources for our wellness. Depending on what identity you're in the room with, I would love to hear what some of you identify as in the chat. But if you're Latinx, you might experience certain boundaries and challenges in accessing different skills or tools that you need to help you along your wellness journey. In the queer community, that's certainly an area where we've had a lot of obstacles to feeling wellness and accessing it. If you're monogamous versus polyamorous, if you're neurodivergent, if you're a person living with a chronic health condition or disability, your immigration status might impact your ability to access services and different resources. So all of this, on top of already living in a society that does not always put wellness at the forefront of anything, right? We're work, and wellness for so many of us, I know for me it wasn't something that seemed accessible to me for a long time. And then I started really like researching on ways to feel better and finding, caveats and ways around accessing certain services that seemed out of reach. Can we go to the next slide? So a little bit more about not just healthcare, but wellness through the lens of healthcare. Most of the research is based on healthcare specifically in the trans community. And a lot of what we keep finding, even after, 10 years after the first study of this, 10 more years pass, 20 more years pass, and we keep coming up on the same data, and that is that the transgender community is likely experiencing a lot of discrimination that is leading to a lower predisposition to seek out healthcare, right? So if we already perceive that there's going to be discrimination, if we've already experienced some discrimination and bias in the healthcare community, we are less likely to seek it out again. And this doesn't even just happen at the personal level. At the community level, we have heard so many stories and so much harm being inflicted on the trans community by the healthcare industry, that you don't have to have an experience to have the fear that comes with seeking healthcare. So some of the actual experiences that people are facing to this day include blatant discrimination, right? Being denied healthcare access because your ID has the wrong name on it or the wrong gender markers. Experiencing delayed care when visiting urgent care centers, as well as when visiting routine providers, right? You've had the same doctor for 5 years. For 5 years now, your care is delayed. And how does that impact you actually saying, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to the doctor because I'm not feeling well, or because I need acupuncture, or whatever other preventative healthcare service you're looking for. The one that upsets me the most, and I want to bring more awareness to, is that providers have a perception that transgender folks are making other patients uncomfortable, and therefore are overcompensating by giving more care and support to the cisgendered patients. Now, that's a huge one, because providers are really there to care for our community. And if they are perceiving folks as making others uncomfortable, right, they're amplifying that discomfort. They're projecting that discomfort back onto our community and really adding to the anxiety and the depression that people already feel when engaging in the healthcare system. So it is not a surprise that we do have higher prevalence of anxiety, depression, and mood disorders amongst the transgender community. And there's always the stress of experiencing some form of stigma. Next slide, please. So sorry. I have a dog. So because of all these barriers that we're facing as a because of all of the barriers that we're facing in community and accessing healthcare, one of the things I have seen in the last 10 years of doing this work is really more and more of our LGBTQIA community is seeking out other ways to access healthcare, to access services that can add to their sense of wellness and well-being. Next slide. So some alternatives to wellness that I wanted to present today include practices that are ancestral, working with herbs and tinctures, working in nature, spiritualism, holistic practices that some have become very much popular, right? Yoga, meditation, energy healing, mantras, yantras, sutras, life coaching, which is similar in some format to therapy, but is more action oriented. Journaling, whether that's based on prompts, on free flow, or on conversational journaling. And somatic work. somatics have really stepped up and become one of the ways that a lot of our communities are processing their trauma through dance and breath work and body awareness practices, grounding, whether that's grounding in nature or grounding at home, but practices that feel grounding to you. Not just the grounding that's featured on the movies where you like put your toes in the grass. That's not the only one way to ground. And massage therapy, right? Actually acknowledging that there's so much of our history that is stored at the cellular molecular level, and that we can actually transmute that and release it through working with the body. Next slide, please. So which of these have you tried? What worked? What didn't work? What barriers have you encountered in the process? Please share in the chat. While we give you guys some time to chime in, I will share personally things that I have tried. I first started with affirmations, right? And that was one of the first tools that I ever got introduced to, was Marianne Williamson and 1001 affirmations that she shares. And I really struggled because I was like, I have been repeating this affirmation for 2 years. It still don't feel true. And I realized for myself, I needed something deeper than affirmations. And I went exploring and journeying into other forms of healing and found other tools that really helped beyond the affirmations. But for a while, I had the idea that I was doing something wrong. And I think that that's one of the common expressions that I hear from people when they are sharing their experiences, like, well, I tried it, but it didn't really work. I don't know why it didn't work. And I kind of gave up, right? And that idea that if something doesn't work, then we give up, rather than seeking out more choices. And I want to share that because I want to encourage each of you to really go out and not just try one thing for one of the pillars in wellness, to really try as many as you can, and take your time in trying them. I see we have a few comments. I've tried lots of those. My faves are plant medicine, somatic work, body work, acupuncture, massage, and energy work. Meditation and breath work, communion and nature, therapy. Greatest barrier is money. Yes. Delving back into those ancestral truths, practices, and perspectives was helpful. Additionally, finding community. Journaling affirmations and energy work. And I really want to elevate the barriers. If you guys can put down any barriers. Somatic dance, barriers of shame, I think is a sign of disconnection of body and self, and is a whip. Therapy is a whip, as it helps be accountable to the sessions, at least. Work in progress. Yeah. So there's barriers. There's a lot of barriers, and one of the most common barriers that I've come across was the first one that was named, in working with people who are of color, who are trans identified. They're at the intersection of so many groups that have experienced oppression systemically, and that sometimes often means that they get paid less and they have less resources financially to allocate towards wellness. So one of the things that I've done to kind of help compensate for some of that is I offer sliding scale. I offer scholarships to some of my clients who can't afford it at all, so that it could be more accessible. Barriers, travel. Yep. Travel can definitely be another barrier. I love what has happened as a result of COVID to some extent, right? That we have really pulled our mind and said, how can we make this accessible online? And now we have sound healing available on Zoom. We have so many things available on Zoom. It's not a solution to everything, but it is an improvement that makes it a lot more accessible for folks with different abilities and who don't have transportation to get everywhere. Any more barriers that you want to elevate, folks? Okay. Next slide, please. So what does all of this have to do with touch, right? The importance of touch was the subtitle for the presentation, and it's one component of the physical well-being that has really profound impact on almost all of the other ones, because what we've come to know is that touch is essential to our mental wellness. And the minute that we begin to take away touch, we begin to actually experience health outcomes that are poorer. So if you look at historically some of the studies that have been done, there were orphanages that were not very well taken care of. And what happened was that the kids were not being picked up, right? They were being fed, they were given bottles in the cribs, and they weren't being fed. And several children died. Their health outcomes really diminished, and they were just sitting there like wondering why. Why is this happening if they're getting food, right? They're getting what they need. Well, the children weren't being picked up. So it showed, it made the first dent on knowing, one, that it's crucial in early childhood, but then we continue to see studies come up that continue to prove this. Recently, studies have shown that prior to COVID, there already was a sense of touch deprivation in community, that people were already feeling very isolated and that they couldn't access touch very easily. And now that has become worse. And it's added to increased levels of depression, increased levels of anxiety in our community, and people just feeling completely out of community and not supported in the ways that they need to. So one of the things that touch can bring is an entire experience neurologically that can help to relieve anxiety, to decrease the sense of loneliness, and to really begin to reset our nervous systems towards the better. Next slide, please. So take a minute and think about, when was the last time you experienced touch? And feel free to share it in the chat. Also, what barriers have you faced in seeking connection, intimacy, and touch? Perhaps you have your immune system compromised, and the last time you felt safe receiving touch was back in 2020. I know that's true for some of my community members. Or perhaps you're wanting touch and you don't want to have sex with the person. And you're like, well, but that's what the person wants, right? Is sex as intimacy rather than another form of intimacy. COVID as the greatest barrier right now. Yeah. Right. We're used to handshakes. Now it's like maybe an elbow that you get, if any touch at all, when seeking connection with someone, even when meeting someone. Now it's very different post COVID. There is resounding support for COVID is a huge barrier. So what have we been doing for the last 2 years? Next slide, please. Most of us, exactly, have been avoiding touch. So for 2 years, we've been avoiding one of the most helpful practices for our sense of wellness. We see that when people experience touch, instantly they feel more connected in the world. Their sense of loneliness drops and their mood elevates. 20 minutes of touch can do that. Sometimes less, right? One real good hug can create a burst of endorphins that can actually have substantial impact on someone's well-being. And for the last 2 years, we really haven't been connecting via touch. So we are running on a depleted cup, right? Some of, maybe like 6 months ago, I could have turned my cup over and nothing was going to fall out because there was nothing in it, right? And we're not talking about it either. So here I want to present some best practices for touch. I recommend everyone go at their own pace. These are practices based on touch therapy and what I personally do as a touch therapist, and ways that you can create more safety around touch when asking someone to have that type of connection. So the first is an invitation. And I think consent, especially now with COVID, is that much more important. And what does that mean? Oh, is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, thank you. And what does it mean to get consent? So the first thing is asking, are you open to having consensual, non-sexual touch? And waiting for the answer, right? For some people is yes, but, right? It's like, yes, but, you know, my ears are ticklish, so don't touch my ears. Okay, so then that's when you get into the rules and the boundaries. And one of the biggest things that I stress for people to do is to set a beginning and an end to the session before you get into it. There is so much anxiety that comes up when we're engaging in this type of experience for the first time or the first few times, that it really does help, even if it's, you know, you're cuddling with a friend. It's important to say, okay, for 30 minutes we're going to cuddle, and then an alarm is going to go off, and then we can stop, or I can stop at any point, but I know it's not going to go more than 30 minutes, and that's kind of my limit with it. So having that timer is really helpful in just removing that pressure. The third thing I would recommend is to practice hearing a yes and a no from each other. To really go into an exercise where you ask each other for some of the things you might want to experience in the session, right? Maybe you want someone to give you a head massage. Hey, would you like to give me a head massage? And then the person might say no. And you get to hear what that no feels like in your body. What's that visceral reaction to the no? Because we all have our own relationship with hearing a yes as an affirmation or a no as a rejection. So it's important to get familiar with hearing the yeses and the nos from one another. Establish how you would like to begin as the next step. You might want to begin just sitting on the couch next to each other, no actual contact. Then you might want to go on to actual cuddle positions. There's a really great resource called The Cuddle Sutras. It's a book, and it has over 40 positions in which you can cuddle with someone. Some of them are very intricate and require some acrobatics, and some of them are really simple positions that you wouldn't think are a way to cuddle, but they are. And last but not least, as a reminder, to begin and go at your own pace. Communication throughout the whole thing is really important. I often ask people, how can this be better? Because often we don't get asked how a good experience can be made better, but it usually can. Next slide, please. Some additional reminders: you can always change your mind. Touch does not have to be sexual and is really powerful, especially when you're consenting adults. Arousal is a natural response to touch. And I'm going to stop at this one for a second, because when we talk about non-sexual touch, it's the intention and the setting for it is not sexual, but it definitely can cause arousal. And a lot of people kind of steer away from it because of that, because they don't want to have that sexual arousal response. And I actually think it's really a normal response. Our skin is our largest sexual organ, so it's important to kind of remember that, and that you can take a break. You can stop and, you know, talk about something else if arousal becomes distracting. But to expect that you won't have any sense of arousal at all during a cuddle session or some form of touch is pretty hard to adhere to that ideology. Instead, you know, how can you make the relationship to your arousal a more healthy relationship, a more dynamic interaction where it doesn't need to mean that you want to have sex. It can just mean I am experiencing arousal right now. And I'm going to just be present to those sensations, because that is really what it is. It's just a flooding of sensation in the body. Next slide. So some activities to try, and I'm not sure if you will all get this, but feel free to take a screenshot of this slide. So my favorite, and the way that I begin and end all of my touch therapy sessions, is with a hand hug. So you're literally putting your hands and just holding in this position. And holding it for 30 seconds. And you can try this even with yourself. You actually feel a sense of comfort, or at least I do. And a lot of my clients have reported the same. But it's really special to try it with someone else. And look into each other's eyes while you're doing it. Eye contact is one of the ways that we acquire information about people. And often we're not really engaging in eye contact. So allow yourself to feel what that feels like. Beginning with heart hugs, right? Heart hugs are when your left shoulder is meeting their left shoulder. And one of the things to note is, for all of the endorphins and oxytocin to be released, the hug should last about 20 to 40 seconds. That's the sweet spot for it to actually have a burst of, happy hormones is what I call them. And the last is, don't be discouraged to host a puddle or party. You don't really need any certifications or any of that to create an environment where people can feel comfortable being in community and experiencing whatever amount of touch feels safe to them. And I do want to say, given COVID, these are in real time can be a risk to anybody, because sometimes you test and you don't even know that you're positive. It says you're negative, and then 2 days later you test positive and you went to a cuddle party that night. So I say always practice to your comfort level. Don't let the fact that a pandemic is happening be the reason you don't experience touch. There's safe ways to engage in this. You can do cuddle parties with masks on. You can have virtual sessions as well, and I'm happy to elaborate more on that if anyone's interested in virtual cuddles. But it's a lot of verbal comforting. And you can always try this with a family member, with a friend who is in your safety bubble, or with someone who's new in your life. Next slide. Thank you everyone for being part of this workshop. I'm going to open it up for any questions and comments. My email is on the slide, as is my Instagram. So feel free to follow and share this information with anyone who you think might benefit from it.